For today's webinar, we have Brian McVicker from the FBI Laboratory presenting U.S. National Footwear Database System Feasibility Study. Without further delay, here is Brian.
I'm Brian McVicker. For the past few years, I've been the project leader for an NIJ-sponsored project that was executed at the FBI Laboratory, and this project was known as the National Footwear Database Evaluation. Culmination of that project is a report was recently published on NIJ's website. It's titled U.S. National Footwear Database System Feasibility Study. Today, I'm going to be sharing highlights from that report with you. I have a few disclaimers. So the names of commercial manufacturers here are provided for identification purposes only, and inclusion does not imply endorsement of the manufacturer or its products or services by the FBI. The views expressed are those of myself and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the FBI or the US government. Any reproduction or other use of these presentation materials without express written consent of the FBI is prohibited. And for brevity today, information herein that was obtained from references will not be cited in this presentation since it is cited in the December 21st report. And there's a hyperlink at the bottom of the slide that provides a link to the report. So today, I'm going to describe the current state of footwear forensics in the US and how that state prevents footwear evidence and information from realizing its intelligence potential. I'll also be describing how the implementation of a national footwear database system can transform the future of footwear intelligence in the US. And I will provide some practical steps that were developed through the project that will improve footwear intelligence capabilities of the US in the near term. I'll provide now some background on the project. So shoe prints at crime scenes and suspects' footwear are routinely recovered and analyzed by forensic examiners in crime laboratories and forensic units. And these are done for one of two reasons. So the first would be source attribution. The objective of that exam is to identify, include, or exclude the suspect's shoe as the source. And the results of those analyses are used by investigators and prosecutors when considering charges or prosecution. The second use for footwear analyses in laboratories is intelligence. So investigators, when they're early on in the case and they don't have a suspect yet, but they have some shoe prints from a crime scene, they can submit images of those shoe prints to laboratories, and the individuals there can search their reference materials and associate the make and model of the footwear that was the source of the shoe print. And so these results are useful to help investigators focus their attention when they encounter suspect's footwear at arrest or as they're searching through a suspect's closet during the execution of a search warrant. I'll start by defining what footwear intelligence is, since we'll be talking a lot about that today. It is the product of organizing, analyzing, and evaluating footwear data to assist law enforcement in decision-making for the purpose of solving crime and preventing future crime. Today, shoe prints and suspects' footwear are not being cataloged in databases to enable connecting the investigative dots using footwear. So the absence of intra and interagency footwear database systems where the footwear data can be housed, it limits the intelligence utility of footwear. So right now, detecting links between scenes is difficult, and generating suspects is also difficult, given the absence of footwear databases. The National Institute of Justice, or the NIJ, believes that a U.S. national footwear database system could positively impact law enforcement operations as well as law enforcement research. So it can do this in two ways: directly by providing a new source or a new tool to generate criminal intelligence, and indirectly, the database could create footwear data sets that researchers can use to develop quantitative methods for the interpretation of footwear class characteristics. In 2016, the NIJ funded the FBI Laboratory to assess the feasibility of implementing a national footwear database system in the US. This study was executed over a 3-year period, approximately from August of 2017 to March 2020. There were 3 individuals that worked on this project at the FBI laboratory who served as the project team. Myself, who served as the project leader, John McGurk, who served as the project manager, and then Stephen Shaw, who served as the project administrator. The materials and methods we used to conduct this 3-year study included a literature review. As with many research projects, that's where it generally starts. We also engaged with the United Kingdom. They have a national footwear database there, and so stakeholders in that system were engaged. We created a project working group and hosted meetings. We interacted with other FBI divisions. We also had briefings and Q&A sessions with the FBI National Academy. The National Academy is a course that is hosted by the FBI that trains senior law enforcement leaders. And we looked at existing U.S. National Forensic Database stakeholders in CODIS for DNA, NIBIN for firearms, NGI for fingerprints, and then also an FBI initiative that's underway as the Rapid DNA Initiative. We also consulted with the footwear industry, specifically the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. We conducted briefings to external partners such as conferences and other meetings. And then we also conducted COTS products evaluations as part of that. The working group that was convened to support this project was an international, interdisciplinary, and interagency working group. It was comprised of 22 members with various backgrounds and expertise from the US, the UK, and Switzerland. And as needed, ad hoc experts were enlisted. This group met twice for 3 days of in-person meetings in Fredericksburg in January of 2018, and then again in June of 2019. This working group served to fill gaps in the team's knowledge and expertise, and also directed the team's research and evaluation. It was a critical aspect of conducting this research and evaluation. So there were 5 conclusions and 3 recommendations that came out of this study. So I'm going to highlight each of those conclusions as well as each of the recommendations, and then also provide the next steps. Conclusion 1 is that footwear information is a valuable source of intelligence that is underutilized in the US. So shoe prints are present at most scenes and can be used to generate leads, reconstruct events, and identify links in serial crimes. The current practices of using footwear for intelligence in the US today are inefficient, so footwear evidence is reserved primarily for prosecution through its laboratory analysis. But when we looked at the UK and Switzerland, we learned that footwear is a valuable source of intelligence when looking at their successes. The UK has implemented a truly national footwear database system. They were able to integrate local and regional systems into a national system where now they're able to share footwear data across the country. So the primary purpose of a footwear database should be scene linking. It can also generate suspects, but it does so less often than biometrics like fingerprints and DNA. Footwear has the ability to generate actionable intelligence quickly using an efficient database system. And I talked about how it generates suspects left off from biometrics, but through the use of a database, footwear can link multiple scenes. It's possible that at one of those scenes that are linked by footwear, DNA or fingerprints can also be collected, and therefore footwear provides a gateway to the suspect. Figure 1 here illustrates the results of footwear exploitation using a database in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. During the period of 2015 to 2017, over 4,700 footwear impressions were collected and cataloged into their footwear database. On the upper left of the slide, you'll see that 36% of those 4,700 generated scene-to-scene links, meaning they linked events. On the upper right of the slide, you'll see that 8% of those collected and cataloged generated suspects. And the remaining 56%, they were not able to make any associations at the time the data was collected, but because they're in the system and will remain there they are potential links to future events. So in summary, 44% of the records ingested into this footwear database had intelligence value. Figure 2 illustrates the results of a footwear database, APHIS for fingerprints, and CODIS for DNA. This data was collected in 2012 from 6 states in Switzerland. The red bars on this chart indicate that a question item or sample was collected. The orange bars indicate that a known item or known sample was collected. The yellow bars indicate there was a scene-to-scene link, and those events were linked. And the blue bars indicate a suspect was generated. You'll notice that the footwear database generated the most samples. So they collected the most samples and imported them in the database, 9,400 versus APHIS and CODIS, where about 4,500 of those evidence samples were collected. Then if you look at the orange bars talking about known samples, APHIS collected the most known samples, 9,000, almost 10,000 known samples of fingerprints were collected into that database, following next with DNA at 5,700, and then the least at 2,000 for footwear. And then when it comes to scene linking, this chart demonstrates that the power for footwear is linking scenes. So the most scene links were generated through footwear, a small number by DNA, and then no links were generated using fingerprints. And lastly, suspects were generated 2,000 times using the DNA database, and then considerably less using the fingerprint database, and then even less using the footwear database. So this reiterates the previous content I shared, that footwear is most valuable for scene linking, and DNA and fingerprints are more valuable for the suspect generation. However, there were suspects that were generated using footwear. In figure 3, we've reconstructed a crime series of 7 events. There are 3 different categories of information. There's contextual information, there's DNA, and there's footwear. And within these scenes, links were made between footwear evidence, DNA evidence, and then contextual information. The dotted lines indicate those categories of information being linked to those particular events. And I stated before that footwear can provide a gateway to suspect. And if we look at event 4, there is both a DNA link and a footwear link. And that also applies to event 5. But through linking both DNA and footwear, we're able to associate events 3 through 7. But then if we add in contextual information to that, we're able to link all 7 events and make that a 7-event crime series. So this demonstrates the power of multiple information types in a single system to generate intelligence. The second conclusion is that the current state of U.S. law enforcement prevents the successful implementation of a national footwear intelligence solution, including the use of a footwear database, to exploit footwear evidence. Today in the U.S., footwear is undercollected from crime scenes, notably lower than DNA and fingerprints, and it's not proportionate to the number of crime scenes attended. In theory, footwear is present at most crime scenes. In the UK and Switzerland, the rates of collection of footwear are higher than they are for DNA and fingerprints. Some contributing factors to undercollection here in the US include the training and experience of the field personnel, those that are collecting the evidence and submitting it to crime labs. It's the agency resources, so low number of people, and also maybe a limited amount of funding that can be dedicated to the collection of evidence. Also, over time, investigators and CSIs have a perceived value of footwear evidence. So if they're not seeing a lot of leads being generated using footwear, they may be less inclined to continue collecting it. And the detection and collection of this evidence type requires specialized materials, equipment, and methods, some of which overlap with fingerprint evidence. We also found that there's a limited number of footwear examiners in crime laboratories and forensic units, many of whom split their time between other disciplines such as firearms, fingerprints, or trace evidence, and this has led to increased turnaround times. There are currently no established footwear intelligence practices in place in the US, and there's a lack of footwear intelligence programs, including databases, across the country as well. Footwear evidence today in crime laboratories or forensic units is generally analyzed using a singular laboratory analysis path, which is intended for court. So personnel in forensic laboratories, they typically report their results only after they have been fully processed and reviewed for use in court proceedings, which is in accordance with stringent quality management protocols. However, this singular path exceeds that required to provide timely intelligence to the field. A legal analysis was performed during this project and found that there's no federal laws that explicitly permit or prohibit the recording of arrestees' footwear during booking. And there is case law that has established that people do not have a privacy interest in what they display to the public. So this would include footwear. And their clothing and other belongings may be seized upon arrival of the accused at the place of detention, and those belongings may be later subjected to laboratory analysis, and their results are admissible at trial. The last statement there is important. So in theory, we could be collecting evidence from the scene, ingesting it into a footwear database. During the booking process, we could then use information and imagery from the database for laboratory analysis, and then the results of that laboratory analysis would be admissible at trial. So this is good news. The third conclusion is that the future vision of footwear intelligence programs require a partnership between the laboratory and field operations. It's only through this collaboration that footwear information can be fully exploited for intelligence. So developing investigative leads requires investigators, laboratory personnel, and prosecutors to engage in a systems-based approach, collaborating closely and transparently on forensic cases. Right now, field personnel hold contextual case information, and crime laboratories hold forensic data using their laboratory information management systems. But most agencies don't share this information using a shared IT solution. However, a shared IT solution with access to more case information by both the field and the laboratory can increase efficiencies by targeting specific exams, avoiding unnecessary ones, and then providing easy access to case data. But this field laboratory partnership will require a paradigm shift by rethinking how the laboratories conduct their practices. So laboratories really need to define two paths for analysis, one for intelligence and then another for prosecution. Conclusion 4 is that a future national footwear database system requires trained, competent, and active users, standardized practices, including classification of the records, and technology that enables efficient acquisition, search, and output. So a footwear database is not just the tools or the technology surrounding that. It's not just the databases and the search functionality. It's actually a system. And a system is comprised of people, processes, and tools. System components associated with the system are databases, technology for acquisition, query, and output, the roles and responsibility of its users, standardized protocols and workflows, and then the administration of the system. I'll start with talking about the people associated with a footwear database system. So there's the user groups within the system include CSIs to collect the evidence, booking officers to record suspects' footwear experts to classify records and provide other expert functions within the system, investigators and crime analysts who will be querying the data and generating leads, and then you have IT experts who are able to create a system that is usable by these groups, and then you have an administrator who oversees the system and the processes. Speaking of processes, there's standardized practices that must be developed and adhered to by users of the NFT system. The first major category of process would be acquisition and data entry. So those are inputs to the system to enable intelligence to be generated. So this would include both scene impressions as well as arrestees' footwear and the associated case information from those events. Next, the records must be classified against a central national footwear reference collection. So this reference collection is simply a pattern of footwear records, and the database should be organized using a one-to-many database structure. So you have one pattern, and that pattern is linked to both scene records as well as suspect records. Lastly, the query, so the search function, and then how that information is output must be considered. Those are significant processes to enable the intelligence aspect of the database that will be performed by the investigators or crime analysts. And that output will be represented in reports, as well as dynamic graphical user interfaces, or GUIs. So figure 4 depicts the future state of footwear intelligence. The first step in this process is recording arrestee footwear and impressions from crime scenes. That information, along with the associated case information, will be uploaded or acquired to the scene footwear database and the arrestee footwear database. The records from scene and arrestee databases will then be classified against the National Footwear Reference Collection. So in figure 5 here, I'm illustrating the classification process using the National Footwear Reference Collection. So this is the process that will be done by footwear experts, primarily footwear examiners and laboratories or forensic units. The top row are 3 records from the National Footwear Reference Collection. So the first we're calling P123 or pattern 123, which is associated with the Nike Air Force One. Second would be a Converse All-Star, which is associated with pattern 456. And then lastly, the Vans Classic pattern, which has been designated P789. So then below the dotted line, you're seeing both scene records on the left and arrestee records on the right. So these records will be in the National Footwear Database, and by matching or classifying the scene and arrestee records with the parent pattern in the National Footwear Reference Collection, we're then able to detect links using footwear. And how those links are generated, here in figure 6, this is how we're going to query the system and then detect those links. And this is the process that'll be performed by investigators or crime analysts. And so in this case, the scene record 1, scene record 2, and then John Doe's record, they all have the same pattern, but at this point, we're not sure if they're actually linked. And so what we have to do is we have to filter those records using contextual information. So the modus operandi, the date of the crime, the gender as purported by a witness, and then also the pattern frequency. And using those filtering methods, we can then detect a suspect link in this case. So the context and pattern frequency were evaluated, and we were able to generate a suspect to scene link in this case. So forward pattern frequency is useful because a common pattern that's seen within a large geographic area is not so significant as an infrequent pattern that's occurring in a large geographic area. And then context is critical because footwear alone, unlike biometrics of DNA and fingerprints, can't generate suspects without that contextual information. So now we'll talk about the tools associated with this National Footwear Database system. There's many tools associated with the operation, but developing detailed system requirements now would be premature since implementation of that system is not immediate. Some of those tools include the software application, the databases, user workstations, peripherals such as scanners and printers, and then the IT infrastructure that will connect all of those tools. And it's key that those tools must be able to perform required processes efficiently. The last and final conclusion is that a National Footwear Database could provide a source of needed footwear data for researchers to improve the state of footwear forensics. However, privacy laws, law enforcement sensitivities, and the absence of ground truth may impair researchers' use of the database. The National Footwear Database System is going to be an operational system, so it contains operational data, which includes personal identifying information, as well as law enforcement sensitive information. And there are laws in place to protect that data for good reason. The system, because it's operational data, will not contain ground truth. So it's not possible to know for certain that a crime scene impression is associated with a particular item of footwear. So it's unknown how much of the data can be transferred to researchers, then therefore how useful it will be. Researchers need the operational data to generate relevant populations. They also need ground truth to enable them to tune their tools and methods. So they're developing algorithms. And in order to do that, they need ground truth to ensure the performance of those algorithms. So the limitations on the data transfer in the absence of ground truth may impair researchers' use of the footwear database. Also, there will be disparity between the operational and research use of the system. They'll be using it in different ways. So the best solution may be two separate systems with customized user interfaces to meet the needs of the user base, and then different data import and export functionality. But both systems will need a conduit for sharing data between them. Despite the potential value that the National Footwear Database System provides for research, system development should really focus on operational needs ahead of research. It's only after sufficient fielding in the operational environment that decisions should be made regarding the research application of the system. So at the end of the project, we determined that it's neither feasible nor fiscally responsible to implement the National Footwear Database System now. So we developed recommendations which will provide a practical pathway to transition the project's research and evaluation into practice. The recommendations that we reported are shared here to provide progressive and short-term solutions to overcome the current limitations of footwear intelligence today. We believe that acting on these recommendations could take footwear from its current low-profile status and limited utility to a revered source of actionable criminal intelligence. Recommendation 1 is that the U.S. establish a National Footwear Intelligence Board comprised of experts from agencies and organizations who represent relevant stakeholder communities that can address the needs of law enforcement at all levels. So this will include stakeholders in the footwear analysis, the collection of the evidence, the investigation and intelligence generation, legal community, technology experts, and also law enforcement administrators. So this National Footwear Intelligence Board will be developing standardized footwear intelligence practices. They will be developing the standards associated with the footwear database, so how the records are named, how they're classified, what types of fields are required in order to capture that information. And then they will be detailing system requirements needed for procurement. So in the development of those aspects of the system, they need to consider the following requirements. So how the system is set up from its architecture, the IT infrastructure, other systems that it will be integrating with. There'll be legal, policy, and privacy issues that need to be considered. We'll have to be thinking about training resources to inform the future users, and then also developing a public relations strategy to share positive outcomes of the system. So before detailed system requirements can be developed, someone must decide where this system will land. So what is the IT infrastructure that will support it? Where will the data be stored? Because that decision will impose integration requirements. Also, technical requirements must be established. So pattern classification, naming, specifics of the data fields, and then how the patterns within the system will be coded. Coding is critical to being able to then search and query the database. Additional legal policy privacy analysis must be executed because a privacy impact assessment will be required. Also, a PR strategy should be developed to increase the criminal justice awareness of footwear and its value for intelligence. So we need to generate some case studies to generate or understand the value of footwear for intelligence. And the board could provide support to regional footwear intelligence programs. So this sort of foreshadows the next two recommendations. Recommendation 2 is that we should establish a federal grant initiative to foster the implementation of regional footwear intelligence programs. Several years ago, the Bureau of Justice Assistance with the ATF created a initiative to reduce gun violence using NIBIN, known as the Local Law Enforcement Crime Gun Intelligence Center Integrative Initiative. In 2020, this initiative resulted in awarding over $6 million, and also through those awards, they were able to increase NIBIN use by system participants. So we believe that a similar grant initiative at the federal level, specific to footwear, could encourage the implementation of regional programs or pilot studies to then advance the footwear intelligence in the US. This initiative would serve two functions. It would demonstrate to pilot study participants that decision makers at the federal level believe that footwear is a source of intelligence. Secondly, it could quell pilot study participant fiscal concerns by leveraging this funding. The administering agency for the footwear initiative would provide national level oversight of these regional pilots. They would also be obtaining relevant metrics and performance measures to be able to evaluate footwear's return on investment from an intelligence perspective. Lastly, we recommend to implement these regional footwear intelligence programs. So the board would assist with the structure and requirements for the regional intelligence programs. Then an initiative would be formed to fund and administer these programs. And then now we're recommending actually implementing those programs. And so what the programs will do is to develop people. So those people that will be interacting with the system will need to be trained, and they'll have to understand the process of footwear intelligence and their roles within the system. They'll have to establish standardized practices. So those are the processes. And then they'll need to define technology requirements. So what are the tools and what are those requirements associated with those tools? Those things will be developed and defined through the use of a regional footwear database. These regional programs will increase law enforcement's awareness of footwear and how it can be used for intelligence. And they will build a business case for a national footwear solution in the future. So these programs will comprise sheriff's office and police departments. So those are the local agencies from a region within a state, and then also the state bureau. These regional pilot programs are recommended because criminals cross jurisdictions when committing their crimes. So link detection will increase using an interagency approach. For example, in Florida, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the state bureau there, would be interacting with Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, the Bradenton Police Department, and that would comprise a regional program. So figure 7 here illustrates the benefits of implementing an interagency program or a regional level program versus something within a single agency or within a single state. And it's looking at the links made by footwear, those made by DNA, those for images, and then also those using contextual information. On the left, data reports that from a single state. So the majority of links being made at the single state level are the contextual links. 71% of the links were made using context. When it comes to the forensic evidence, the footwear, the DNA, and the images, those provided a much smaller utility for intelligence. But footwear leads the other two in its generation of intelligence. When we look on the right side of the chart, these are the outcomes across agencies or across states. So you'll notice here that the contextual information, which was the most significant at the state level, dropped significantly from 71 to 25%. And you'll notice that all 3 bars representing footwear, DNA, and images increase significantly, with the most increase demonstrated by footwear. So footwear goes from 19% to then 49%, or half of the links within the system are made using footwear. But the other two categories, DNA images, also significantly increase. And so for this reason, we're recommending that a regional or a multi-agency approach be executed rather than a footwear intelligence program at a single agency or a local level. So I'm happy to report that there are some next steps already in place based on the outcome of the National Footwear Database Evaluation project. Recently, the National Institute of Justice, through its Forensic Technology Center of Excellence, has acted on recommendation 1, and that was to develop a footwear intelligence board. But they opted to create a precursor to the board, which is termed the Footwear Intelligence Development Group, or the FIDG. And so this will happen before the board. And this group is tasked with developing a short-term action plan to address findings, conclusions, and recommendations that were reported in the U.S. National Footwear Database Feasibility Report. This group's first meeting will be happening virtually, and it will be starting tomorrow, and then another meeting the following day, so February 16th and 17th. And this group is set to expire within 1 year of its inception because it's supposed to be a temporary solution to something more long-term. That long-term solution would be the board. And at the end of the group's term, it is the goal to have identified a funding agency, and that agency would be administering the Footwear Intelligence Board. In this, however, it's unknown what that agency will be at this time. That is one of the action items for the Footwear Intelligence Group, is to identify this unknown federal agency to administer the board. So lastly, I want to acknowledge the National Institute of Justice for funding this exciting feasibility study. It was a pleasure working on it for the past few years. I've interacted with a lot of people across the country, including several members of NIJ. And then I also want to thank the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence for hosting this webinar. So thank you all for your attendance and participation. If you want to ask me any questions later, please email me at bmcvicker@fbi.gov. Thanks so much for your time today.
All right. Thank you, Brian. That was a fantastic presentation. We've already got plenty of questions that have rolled in, so let's go ahead and get into a little Q&A session. First question that I have here: why do you think that the UK is so far ahead of the US in terms of footwear intelligence practices?
There, sorry to mute. They've been practicing forensic intelligence, including the use of footwear, since about the 1950s. And so they've had a lot of time to finesse those practices, develop the people, and then also develop the tools. And so, as I stated earlier in the webinar, it was only through local, then regional databases that they were created that then those decision makers at the top level were able to have confidence that they were going to get a good return on their investment in terms of intelligence generation at the federal level. So they saw a good use for integrating those local regional systems into a national system. And it's just something that they've been doing for a long time. And so they've seen value in investing in that evidence type.
Gotcha, understood. Next question I have here: when you indicate scenes to scene links, do you mean level 1 association links?
I'm not sure what the level 1 association means, but what I'm talking about for scene to scene links is that you have a series of burglaries occurring in a particular neighborhood, and they're recovering footwear from each of those, and because there's similar contextual information, such as the modus operandi, when these crimes are occurring, that they would be linked because they also have a common footwear pattern.
Gotcha. We'll see if maybe the question asker has some further clarifications and circle back if they do. Next question I have here: do you envision the collection of known impressions from footwear at a rest to be similar to the current collection of known fingerprints / palm prints?
Yes. Yeah, very much so. So it would be one of the routine categories of information that would be collected from arrestees. So in the UK, they have integrated a shoe outsole scanner, specifically the Everspray outsole scanner, so that the arrestee will step on as part of the booking process. They capture their shoe prints, record some information about the footwear, and then those arrestee footwear impressions get ingested into their national system, and then they can be quickly searched for rapid intelligence. And so I would like to see the same thing here in the U.S. So it would just be one of the types of information that would be collected along with fingerprints, DNA, and other information about the suspect or arrestee.
Understood. Another question I have here: could the number of regional level footwear links actually be a reflection of the popularity of certain footwear brands / models rather than busy repeat offenders across the region?
I mean, I think, well, when it comes to links, we're not just seeing the number of patterns across the region. It's actually those patterns have to have other information that determine they were a link. So it's not good enough to have 25 Nike Air Force One patterns coming into the system. It's only the number of links that are made through the footwear pattern plus context or pattern frequency. So I think it'll get around just being popular footwear models and will then lead to repeat offenders across the region.
Makes sense. Next question I have here: you recommended integrating field and laboratory systems to increase investigative efficiencies. Are you concerned about laboratory exams possibly being biased if examiners have access to more case information?
Yeah, that's the critics of forensic science they're critical because there have been research studies that demonstrate that examiners can be biased by contextual information when conducting their exams. I do agree with that. However, I've recommended that we develop two paths for evidence coming through the laboratory. We need a path for intelligence, and we need a path for proceedings in court. And so right now we're treating it all as if it's going to court. So what we need to do is be able to separate that. When we know something's coming in at the investigative level, we need to send it down a particular path. People involved in generating leads at the intelligence phase should be privy to more contextual information. If later on we get shoes from a suspect, at that time, those will be entered into evidence. And then the amount of information or context that will be provided to the person conducting the comparison between the question impression and the known will be much less than that is afforded to the one performing intelligence activities.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question I have here: are you concerned that the limited number of footwear examiners in the U.S. may pose a challenge to implementing a footwear intelligence program or programs?
I think it could. I think it's just mainly the fact that we're not doing as much with footwear right now as we could be versus some of the other disciplines such as fingerprints, DNA. And so by starting to utilize footwear more often through these regional pilots, we'll start to see the need for more personnel to be trained in footwear and have that expertise. So I think the regional pilots, that's another outcome there, is that we're going to understand what resources are required for those to generate the intelligence. And then I think we'll see an uptick and people being brought into the footwear fold.
Sure, absolutely. Once the people processes, et cetera, are implemented for that region, what sort of turnaround times would be anticipated to make scene to scene links or suspect to scene links?
Uh, they would need to be, as quick as possible. If you again look at the UK, they implemented what they call Tread Finder, at least at the Met Police, and through the rapid acquisition of arrestee footwear, and then scene impressions being collected, those are all going into the system, and they calculated that within 10 minutes of an arrestee coming across the scanner, an intelligence report will be generated and emailed to the officer investigating that particular crime. And so if there's any links made between that arrestee and other scenes, those will be rapidly deployed. And so not all of the links we made within 10 minutes, but there's possibility that could be done very quickly using some automated processes to generate these leads.
Understood. Do you expect there to be any sort of quote unquote lights out searching capability for intelligence to be able to have a more immediate search?
Yes, that sort of piggybacks on what I was just responding to. So the Met Police does have that, and some of the databases have you import the crime scene, you import the arrestee, and it's able to do pattern matching using algorithms rather than somebody actually having to code the data. Coding is generally going to follow, but initially the system could do that automatically to generate that rapid intelligence, and then be followed up with more like dark blank. I can't think of what I'm trying to say, but
That's okay. We'll move on to the next one. I appreciate you getting into a little more detail on that. Another question I have here: would the Footwear Intelligence Group develop standards or suggested language specifically in relation to the intelligence reports?
yes, I think one of the big outcomes that we're hoping to get out of the development group is a best practices document. So this would start to establish specific forensic intelligence practices within laboratories and within the field, so that they know what to do when the evidence is collected. The laboratory knows what to do when they get evidence in the lab and how to process that efficiently. And then those investigators and analysts will know how to use that information. So one of the key objectives of the development group is to develop standardized practices, which will include some of the things that you had mentioned.
Sure, absolutely. Another question I have here: some of the current issues with make and model determination databases have been a semi-subjective coding process. What is the plan for more objective coding of the footwear impressions?
It would be to establish a national standard for how we would code the impressions. We know that some of the off-the-shelf products, they have a huge number of icons that can be attributed to the design, the elements on the outsole. And so then others have a more simplified approach. And what we would do, either in the development group or at the board level, we would be establishing a standardized coding practice with a small number of icons or descriptors that would represent the outsole and other information. And then we would have some practices associated with how to code, how to search, and how to use that information. So it would be a national approach. And this is what the UK did. They, back in I believe it's the late 2000s, they developed a coding scheme that involved about 12 to 15 descriptors. And those descriptors represent large categories of round things, linear things, complex shapes. And it makes it much easier when you only have a few places to bin these outsole design features, and you're going to see naturally more consistency than if we have a large number of these descriptors. So we'd like to develop a national standard for how these things will be coded and practices that will surround that coding.
On slide 16, you stated that a singular and complete laboratory analysis of footwear evidence may be unnecessary for intelligence. Can you explain more about this and how could things better to meet the timely demands of investigation?
So we need to be able to look at the end use of what's being requested, what phase in the process this is. At the investigative phase, we don't have a suspect yet. We're just trying to develop a lead, link some scenes, potentially generate a suspect. And so at that point, we repeat the question. I got lost my train of thought here.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So this one's kind of covering what you had mentioned on slide 16, where you had stated that a singular and complete laboratory analysis of footwear evidence, and just kind of explaining more about this and how could things better meet the timely demands of investigations.
Right. And so we don't always have to process things entirely. So we need to think about what exams need to be done to meet the timeliness of investigation. So it doesn't mean that we're going to process evidence like we do today. We may not need to chemically process something because we can see the pattern. Let's just search it. Less photography potentially. And so trying to work with investigators at the onset to understand what they're trying to accomplish and then how we can meet those needs to be efficient.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question I have here, can you give some examples of what scene contextual information would be included in a search?
Well, the MO. So that would be recorded at the scene. They would record, it was looked like it was a tool mark on the front door or a window. How the crime occurred, and then what happened during the crime, because those types of activities will repeat for the same offender. The geographic location of the crimes will, depending on the type of crime, so burglary, it may be in a small geographic area within a neighborhood or some commercial businesses off of an interstate or an exit or something like that. But then you might have, so you can have a smaller area of geography when it comes to generating links, maybe using burglaries. But then when it comes to maybe bank robberies, the banks may not be as close together. And so people doing the same types of bank robberies, and then you might want to expand your search a little bit to encompass more banks in the area to try to find that common pattern, common MO. It could be the gender of the offender, so that will be recorded when the arrestee comes across the scanner and recorded at arrest. And we would have individuals, witnesses that would be able to report which, whether it was a guy or a girl. And then the pattern frequency, although it's not contextual, it goes to the fact that a common pattern in a large geographic area is just not as significant as a very rare pattern in that same area. So I see pattern frequency as a big thing in addition to some of those others that I mentioned.
Gotcha. I think we have time for maybe 1-2 more questions. One more I got here. Would the database also include manufacturer outsoles to a specific search? So a specific search could be done to find what the make and model of that unknown impression is?
There may be. I think the system would provide the opportunity for footwear experts to import reference material from manufacturers, whether it comes from online stores or other sources. However, the bulk of the footwear data that would be ingested into the National Footwear Reference Collection would be from operations. So it would be the arrestee footwear that would then be sanitized, taking the personal information any event information, and then it just becomes a pattern. And so we'll see a paradigm shift in terms of the make and model, which is how we report our leads now, very focused on make and model. However, the model generally is not that important unless somebody's going to do an internet search to find more about it. So the key really is to focus on the pattern and the contextual information in order to generate these leads. And so if you have a comprehensive reference collection just from Rusty Footwear, it's possible to make these links to the suspect as well as links between scenes. So it's going to just a mindset change where you're not so focused on the make model, but rather the pattern itself.
Gotcha. I think this is a great one to kind of wrap up on. If my agency is interested in learning more about being a test site when the project gets set up and running, how do we go about doing this?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that's one of the things that the development group is going to work on is identifying potential pilot study participants. So at some point, I think that group, we will develop an email address, something where we can solicit or where others can come learn about what the group is doing and then have some point of contact to be able to record that information so that in the future, when we are looking for pilot study participants, we'll have a database of possible users.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. I think that is all that we have time for. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to present the material, to answer some questions from the audience. Really appreciate the time that you have provided for us to be able to pick your brain on this.
Yeah. And I want to thank all the audience members and for providing those great questions.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to go ahead and get your contact information on the screen so that people can jot down if they have any follow-up questions. But again, thank you, Brian. We really appreciate the time and the expertise.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Before you leave today's webinar, we ask if you could participate in a short 5-minute survey. You will see a checkbox icon directly above the chat. Simply click that button to be linked to the audience feedback survey for today's event. Your feedback about our webinars is critical information that helps us improve and continue to provide you the best webinar experience possible. If you could please take those few moments to complete the survey, we would greatly appreciate it. Lastly, across the top of the live stream window are links to all our social media profiles, including Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, a link to our website at forensiccoe.org, and a link to listen to episodes of the FTCOE's podcast, Just Science. There's also a link to sign up for the FTCOE newsletter so you can stay up to date with everything that FTCOE is doing in support of the forensic community. Thank you again for attending, and we hope everyone has a great day.